that stage now where we're actually going to get into some real design work, and we're really excited to share some tools and a canvas particularly that we are going to ask you to use and to practice this, because as with everything, practice makes perfect, and really spending a little bit of time designing some learning sequences will be hopefully a very, very helpful thing for you. Now, the paper copy of all of these, the resource copy is within your workbook and downloadable. So what we're going to do, though, is we're actually going to show you one tool that we love to use, which is a Miro board. Now, a lot of you will have used a Miro board. It's kind of a zoomable whiteboard. You can put sticky notes in it and that kind of thing. It's really great. And we're actually, because we did a little bit of work in the Miro board on our design canvas, and we're actually going to be presenting from there, which is why it looks a little bit different right now.
It's a little bit different, yeah.
So Tom, take us through then. What is the design canvas and how do we use it?
So this is bringing everything together, and a little canvas that we've created here gives us the opportunity to look back upon some of those key techniques, methods, and tools that we've used so far in the course and bring it together at the point of design. And so let's have a look at what the canvas actually looks like. You would have, hopefully you can find this in your workbook, and remember you can download this at any particular point. One of the things we would just want to spend a bit of time on is just looking at each individual section, and then Chris is going to take us through an example. So we've got a worked example for you to have a look at as well. So our design canvas has 6 sections. And these are things that you know because we've worked on them already. So you know that this is we've talked about the concept bubble as one of your first Activate tasks in chapter 2. So go back and dig that work up, and hopefully you can use it here, transpose some of that across into this particular space. The concept bubble is a chance for us to look at the elements and ideas, parts of a bigger learning outcome, and how that learning outcome sits within the broader concept of learning, the bigger kind of picture. Remember, we're zooming in to look at the pieces, zooming out to look at the bigger concept. This is the chance for you to capture some of that. And you'll notice as well that this is quite small and short. It's not looking for intricate detail. We're looking at a high level here, and we would say between 15 and 20 minutes. So just to kind of run through each of run through the whole canvas. So you're making notes at a high level. We don't want it to take place of really intricate design. We're looking at a much higher level to give us a sort of indication about some of the ways we might use a solar taxonomy. So concept bubble first, then growth ladder, making some notes about the path of growth. Again, you've got your little reference points along there in terms of the solar taxonomy. You might make some individual notes about what this concept means at different points. You might look back upon the growth ladder resources just for some examples of some of those that we've shown. Choose a proxy. So we've learned about what this is, and a representation of understanding or a representation of learning. What is it that you're going to pay attention to in the classroom? What is it you're looking for? Remember, this is a design canvas. So this is you designing these things, thinking carefully through what's your choices that you're making. How are you going to create the opportunity for a student to represent their learning? What's the specific signal of learning that you're looking for? And so you're choosing a proxy here, whatever that might be. Remember, Chris is going to work through an example with us in a second. You're going to list some ideas that might go into a student's portfolio. So what's the evidence that's going to show that learning has taken place? This is a good reminder to us to kind of capture small kind of pieces of evidence over time, building up a physical or digital learning portfolio that shows beautiful work, shows learning taking place. So what evidence will clearly tell the story of learning? We're going to look at question design. So at this point, being able to design something like a series of questions related to the taxonomy, maybe connected up to the growth ladder, is a really great way to think about the solar taxonomy at this particular point. So you're sat with your colleagues, you're thinking about what's coming up next term, you're thinking about a particular unit of work. One of the simplest ways that we could really interact with the solar taxonomy at that point is just to think about what questions could we ask at these different levels. Let's look at a quick example of maybe questions, maybe from a different context here. We've got, this is from a point of view of looking at a kindergarten class I was working with, and we've actually looking at some concepts around weather And each of these different sets of questions then builds on the other. So think of it like a chain, and think of it working from left to right. So tell me one of the seasons we experienced during the year. You can already see that the language is associated with quantity. So one idea. Describe is often associated. So the next question, describe the different seasons and the weather we have during the year. That word describe is often related directly to that multi-structural level. So we've got many parts to it. Relational, the question might extend to what causes some of the different weather we experience during the year. Obviously, as soon as you start to introduce causality, then you're looking at connections and links and that kind of chain. Choose a season you prefer and explain why. An extended question for this particular concept might be about a reflection about how the seasons change and how weather changes during the year, or maybe even how we adapt to those differences, so the choices that we're actually making, and then maybe bringing and extending that to different countries or cultures and how they may respond to different seasons and weather. So all we've done here is just spend a bit of time just thinking about what question would be appropriate at that particular level of the taxonomy. And we're just trying to use, and as a utility to us, the language of the taxonomy within the actual question. And so question design is a key part of our design canvas, because it's one of the easiest things that we can create really, really quickly as we're designing a sequence of learning. And then, just as you've just seen in the previous lesson, we're asking you to think carefully about the design of critique. And so what is it that you're going to do in order to generate opportunities for critique for your students? And it's not just about you giving critique. It's thinking about the whole system and the whole experience that your students are working through. And so they might get critique from their peers, from others, from experts, from yourself, from them. They might generate some of that themselves. There's lots of different ways that we can, and we again encourage you to dip into our ebook on feedback and critique strategies. But maybe a crucial question is there enough time? So when is it going to happen? And we would encourage you to think about the timeline of learning taking place here, and when are you going to implement or give them the opportunity for critique to occur. So there's our 6 different aspects of our design canvas. At a high level, we're reckoning about 15 to 20 minutes to be able to run through all of those things, maybe a bit more to begin with, but then hopefully over time, once you use it, you'll get a bit quicker. Chris, we're going to have a quick look at your example here, aren't we? So first of all, we've got the concept bubble. Remind us about the concept in the middle here.
So this concept comes directly from the curriculum. So it's looking at a year 9 kind of earth sciences curriculum. Mm-hmm. So the theory of plate tectonics explaining global patterns of geological activity and continental movement. Yeah. So I've got this here, and if you remember right back to a million years ago, was it chapter 2, when we were looking at this concept bubble? This is the same one. What I haven't got on here are the arrows. But I would be thinking about, these are the core things. This is the core, this idea of plate tectonics and global patterns of geological activity. What are the things that relate to that? And some of these come from the curriculum. Some of them I've added in. And then if you look at those kind of green pieces, then they're kind of your multi-structural elements in there. So really getting this concept bubble out really quickly was super useful for me, because it actually helped me to do a few things. Some of it was to kind of uncover the language I would be using with the students and the language they would need to use. Some of that really specific topic vocabulary, like destructive plate boundaries and constructive plate boundaries, volcanoes, mantle core. So often those elements actually give us some really interesting language. So they give us the kind of core vocabulary that we want learners to use. And then those bigger concepts which are there, which are starting to get more towards that relational understanding, are just kind of put out there in those yellow Post-it notes. So what I know is that that's my bubble. If I were to have drawn a circle around it, and maybe as we talked about in chapter 2, thought about, well, what happens just beyond that bubble? What's semi-permeable membrane? Where can I go next? And what I might be looking at in terms of extended abstract is, well, this is all about global patterns of geological activity and continental movement, but maybe I could think about what's the impact of these geological activities on humans, for example. Yep. Or I might take looking at a system level view. How is the system which we've got here around, the core, creating heat to convection, mantle moving, plates moving, all that kind of system stuff. How is it like another system, a different system? So being able to bridge across to another concept that I've already looked at. So that's kind of my concept bubble, which took me probably 3 or 4 minutes to kind of put together. And then what I wanted to do was to look at my growth ladder, and I actually started to write, because I write growth ladders a lot. I kind of went straight into that language. I don't think you necessarily have to. You could just jump down some ideas, but I actually went straight into writing my growth ladder in that language. So I can't yet name any forms of geological activity. At the structural, I can talk about common geological activity like earthquakes and volcanoes. Multistructural, I can explain convection and its role in continental plate movement. But that is still not linking it to the geological activity, right? So it's still actually multistructural, even though there's a little bit of kind of a mini relationship in there. It's not until I get to that relational level that I can link varieties of plate movements at boundaries, so destructive and constructive, to earthquakes, volcanoes, and seafloor spreading. And then my extended abstract, as I said, is, I can hypothesize what might happen if energy was removed from the system. Like all volcanoes would stop if the energy was removed from the system. Or I could also maybe extend and explain the impact of geological activity on humans and human settlements. And while I criticized multi-stacking, this was the point we made when we were talking about growth ladders, is once you get the extended abstract, there are actually several possible extended abstract pathways. So that's one of the challenges, is to look at, well, once relational is, I want to make sure that everyone is there. That's my kind of gold standard. Every student's there. Extended abstract is really that opportunity for differentiation as well, and that opportunity for personalization, because your extended abstract might take you in a totally different direction to mine. So it's really interesting to actually give some variety in that space.
Excellent. So should we have a look at the next part?
Let's do it. Let's have a look at a proxy. So I love video. I think actually getting kids to create beautiful work is really important. I've seen lots of wonderful proxies. I saw an economics, I think it was maybe a year 11 economics class, who made an illustrated vocabulary of economic terms, and illuminated, like the Gospels. So these beautiful artworks, which of the initial letter of the word, which were illuminated and beautifully kind of drawn, and then an explanation of that word. So there are tons of really creative proxies we can come up with. I went for something which probably isn't super difficult, and students have definitely got the skills to be able to do it, but it maybe is a slightly different way to say, let's make a video documentary on the causes and consequences of a specific geological activity. So that gives me some options also over, in terms of content, process, and product. I might give some some agency and some choice to students around, you choose whichever of these geological activities you're most interested in. Is it tsunamis? Is it volcanoes? Is it earthquakes? What might it be? I want you to make a video documentary, but if you want to come back to me and say, I want to make a stop motion, fine, that's good, as long as that stop motion is going to display your understanding. So, even though I'm choosing a proxy, I'm always open to negotiation with students around what would be the best proxy for them as well.
Excellent. So should we look at the next part, which is to do with maybe what's going into their portfolio? So this might kind of blow out the parts of the documentary filmmaking, Chris. What have we got here?
So it's absolutely about triangulation. So the documentary is going to give me some information, and actually, because I think it's a well-designed proxy, it's going to give me a lot of information. So I'm going to be able to see whether kids are able to explain things at a multistructural level, whether they're actually working at relational level, or whether they're able to work in an extended abstract way. But at the same time, that's only ever one piece of evidence. And as we know with all kinds of learning growth, is we need to triangulate the evidence to make sure that we have backups. And so, for example, we might have an annotated learning hive. So I might give them, thinking right back to the start of this course where we gave you the learning hive for today, I might actually give them a learning hive right at the beginning of this and say to them, as we're going through this learning, I want you to annotate it and put your notes on it so we can kind of see your burgeoning understanding. I might give them a vocabulary quiz. Like, there's nothing wrong with giving a vocabulary quiz as a way to get some data. I might want them to make a video storyboard. I might actually record a learning conversation. And something I did a lot when I was working with Year 12 students teaching French at that time was I would use something like Google Classroom on my mobile device. And I would actually have learning conversations with kids, which we just recorded straight into Google Classroom and shared only to them. But it's a really powerful way for them to have a kind of learning conversation captured and kept in a portfolio. And then something as simple as your bibliography of research, like, some standard things, but it helps me to triangulate that this documentary has also got this other evidence around it and builds that more evidence portfolio kind of holistic view.
Yeah, nice. And I think that's a useful way of thinking about that signal being triangulated. So, this is telling me one thing. I'm just checking with these other things that, there's the accuracy and efficacy of that signal. So it's quite a nice way of thinking about it, the idea of triangulation. And certainly any evidence should be able to give you that type of clarification, a further clarification about where this learner is at. Yeah. Let's look at some questions, Chris. So we've got, this is, again, it's one of the easiest places to start for us. We can maybe design some questions.
And we sometimes forget, though, forget educators to design questions and to think deliberately about the questions we're asking and who we're targeting them at and why we're asking those questions. But really simply, things like what's one type of geological activity you can name? So moving those kids, and I think I gave that example when we talked about the concept bubble itself, was, if I say kids geological activity, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm pre-structural here. Or they kind of, hand up in a pre-structural little wave there. But I might say, well, can you name one type of geological activity? Do you know what a volcano is? And they're like, yeah. And then they suddenly, oh, okay, that's one. So volcanoes are a bit, earthquakes are often put together. Okay, well, we're actually starting to get, a little bit more multi-structural as they start to build that up. And so those questions can be as simple as, finding out and just setting kids on the right path, I guess. So name what is one type of geological activity? What are tectonic plates and why do they move? So it's already starting to kind of push them in the right direction. What's the relationship between tectonic movement and your geological activity? Can you describe how energy is transferred in the system? And what are some of the impacts on humans of your geological features? So going from really just guiding them down that path to move through uni, through multi, to more relational understanding, and then actually trying to say, okay, let's abstract this, let's extend this. What happens if? What would happen if? So I think that question design is a really useful tool. And to be honest, it's also a really useful tool for students. So, we often ask students for answers, but indeed one of the most powerful things we can do is ask them for questions. So getting them to come up with these things of what's the next question I can ask to help me know more about something is often a really useful tool.
Great. So let's have a look at just the final part of our design canvas is to consider feedback and critique. Maybe you can start with the post-exhibition reflection. So is that something happening at the end?
Yep, absolutely. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm actually going to exhibit these documentaries. That's a really important thing. I want to get an authentic audience. So I either want to run a fair or I'm going to put them into a website and I'm going to invite parents to have a look. I'm actually going to get some volcanologists involved because that's really raising the bar for students about getting them to exhibit their learning to authentic experts. But after that kind of exhibition, what I really want the students to do is to, in terms of the critique, in terms of where to go next, is to think about and reflect on metacognitively, like we've done with the reflect and extend activities throughout this course, is to get them to think about, what was my learning like? And indeed, you can then pull out one of those other growth ladders, which maybe focuses in on a capability and get students to focus on, actually my collaboration on this one was only, multi-structural. I really want to work on getting the best out of the group, that kind of thing. We'd also have things like, as I said, the recorded learning conversations. That's in my critique design as well as in my portfolio. I might get them to do a 1-minute pitch of their storyboard for public critique. So a really powerful thing. And we would always recommend, and indeed we will link below the Austin's butterfly video that we talked about in the critique section just now, because that's an example of really beautiful public critique. You might have that peer sharing of the annotated learning hive. So getting kids to share their information, share their knowledge, getting some more strategies to make sure they gap fill any knowledge gaps they have. And then maybe a detailed fine-tuning session with peers. Now, fine-tuning protocols are one of my favorite activities to get students to give each other like 15 minutes of critique. Like, it's not just like, have a look at my work, Tom, what do you think? Oh, it's really nice. Yeah. It's like, you've got 15 minutes to unpack this. And it's an investment in time, but really developing those critique skills in our young people as well, so that they can use them with their peers, but also in terms of self-reflection as well. So that was honestly, it took me probably about 20 minutes to do the whole thing. I've had a lot of practice, so it might take you a little bit longer, but you can definitely get it down to something which is really, really manageable in terms of creating a design canvas.
Excellent.
So, Tom, are we going to do a little bit of stopping and building?
Whew, yeah, I think we are. So this is an opportunity now for you to really spend some in-depth time with your own context in mind. We feel that we've set you up really well with the tools that you need, the provocations. Chris is taking you through a worked example there of how that design canvas might work. And this is the opportunity now for you to stop and download all the things that you need and start really to spend some time just building and designing yourself. And so that might take you might choose to, sort of pause the course here and just, take some time to reflect and come back to this. You might plan to sit with your colleagues and work through the design canvas together. That's a great way. We really encourage you to kind of bring your peers, bring your colleagues into this conversation about designing great learning and use some of those strategies and techniques. And so this is that moment where we're gonna stop here, and you're gonna download or make sure you find the design canvas in the workbook. We've got it included as the PDF down here as well. And so this is the chance for you to go off and explore that canvas on your own. Think about how you're going to bring your context into that space and consider what's coming next. It needs to be a practical application for you, so it really helps ground some of the learning that you've done so far in the course. So at this juncture, there's an opportunity for you to stop and to build, and we'll see you in the next lesson.